In this video, I want to show you how to connect to the Watson 132 computers remotely. To begin with, you should have VS Code and a terminal open. If you're on a Mac or Linux computer, you can use the Terminal app, or if you're on a Windows computer, you can use PowerShell. You'll also need to be sure that your computer is on the Davidson network. You can achieve this either by being physically on campus or by connecting to the Davidson VPN. Once you're on the campus network, you'll be able to access the Watson Linux computers using SSH and SCP. To begin with, let's use our terminal to log into a Watson Linux computer remotely using the command SSH. We'll type SSH space and then the username and computer for our connection. Your username should be your full Davidson email. And then we need another @ sign and the name of the computer that you're connecting to. All of the computers in the Watson 132 Linux lab have some address .davidson.edu as their name for SSH connections, and you will be assigned a specific computer to connect to on Slack, and the purpose of this is to ensure that we're not all connecting to the same computer simultaneously and overloading it. So you'll replace this XYZ with the particular computer you've been assigned. For now, I'll log into W21048. And if I haven't connected to this computer before, it will ask me, am I sure I want to do this? I'll type yes. And after a moment, it will prompt me for my password. This is your standard Davidson login password. And note that while you're typing, the cursor won't move, but your keystrokes are being recorded. And now my prompt shows that instead of being logged into the computer in my office, I'm now logged in to one of the computers in Watson 132. From here, I can run Linux terminal commands that will execute on that Watson computer. For example, I can run ls to list the contents of the current directory, and I can run pwd to print my working directory, and it shows that I am in my home folder on the Linux file system for Davidson, and it lists out all of the subfolders that are inside my home directory. To log out from this SSH connection, I can either type exit or hit Control-D, and now my terminal is again running on my local computer. Next, let's try copying files back and forth between my computer and the computer in Watson. In VS Code, I have my CSC 250 folder open, and I'm going to create a new file, and I'll call it test.txt, and I'll add some text to this file, and save. And now I want to navigate my terminal to the directory where I just saved that file. Currently, I'm in my home directory on my office computer. And if I list the contents of my home directory, that includes the desktop. So I can use the cd command for change directory to navigate into the desktop folder. And then, since my CSC 250 folder is on the desktop, I can, from here, cd into my CSC 250 folder. And now, if I list the contents of this folder with ls, we see this test.txt file. And I can print out the contents of that file to the command line with the cat command, which is short for concatenate. And we see that we succeeded in saving our line of text to the file. So now I want to send this file to the Watson computer. And I'll do that using the command scp, which stands for secure copy. This command takes as its first argument the location of the file that we want to copy, and that is this test.txt file in the current folder. And then the second argument is the place we want to send it. And that is specified much like the SSH destination from before. So I'm going to copy and paste the username @computer string from our SSH command earlier, but then we need to tell it where on that computer do we want to send the file. So we give a colon after the computer name, and then the folder that we want to put this file in. And I'm fine with just putting it in the home folder on that computer, and the shorthand name of your home directory is the tilde character. So I will give tilde/ to indicate that I want to put it in the home folder. When I hit enter to run this command, it will prompt me for my password, and then copy the file test.txt. Now, if I run the SSH command again, and I can get back to previous commands using the up arrow on the terminal, and if I run this command again, now if I list the contents of my home directory on Watson, we have, in addition to the folders that were already there, we have our file test.txt. And again, we can use the cat command to dump out its contents, and we see that it has the same text that we saved on our computer. Now, if we want to modify that file that lives in the Watson computer, we need to use a text editor that runs in the command line. And for that, we will use the command vim. If we type vim space, the name of the file that we want to edit, and hit enter, then the Vim text editor will open that file. If we want to insert text into a file using Vim, we first need to hit the I key, which changes Vim into insert mode. Now I can start typing text into this file. I'll go to the end of the line and create a new line and add some additional text. And when I'm done inserting, we have to leave insert mode, which we do using the escape key. Now that we're out of insert mode, we can use Vim Commands, which start with a colon, and the most important Vim command to know is WQ, which stands for write and quit, and this is how we save and exit. When I hit enter to run this command, it dumps me back out onto the command line of the Watson computer. And if I go back to my cat command to dump the contents of the file, we now have the extra line that we added using Vim. Now say we want to copy that modified file back to our local computer. Well, we can exit to log out of the SSH connection, and now I'm back in my CSC250 folder, and I can use the scp command again, but this time the location we want to copy from is the remote computer, and we want to copy to the current directory. So we specify the remote file we are copying by login at computer:location. So I will copy and paste that. But now we're not copying the home directory, we are copying the file called test.txt that lives in the home directory. And we want to copy that to the current folder on my computer, and the shorthand for the current directory is a single dot. When I run this command, it will copy the file test.txt into my CSC250 directory, and that will overwrite the existing file with the name test.txt. And VS Code helpfully shows that the file has been updated. Now that we've seen how SSH lets us log into a remote computer and SCP lets us copy things back and forth to remote computers, we can actually make these commands much easier to use by setting up some configurations. The first step is in VS Code. Because we installed the remote development extension last time, we have on the left-hand pane the Remote Explorer tab. If we click on that tab, it shows us that we don't have any SSH targets specified yet. So let's add a place that VS Code knows how to SSH to. We'll click the Add New button. And now we can copy and paste the exact same SSH command that we ran on the terminal. Again, it's worth noting that the computer you are connecting to will be the one specified on Slack. But if we hit Enter here, it will ask us where we want to save this configuration. And you should choose the default location, which should be in your home directory, and a folder called .ssh and a file called config. The location of the home directory will be different based on what type of system you're on, but the name of the folder and file should look similar on Linux or Windows or Mac. And then it will give us the option to open that configuration file, and we want to do that. So what's saved in this configuration file is the name of the computer that we're connecting to, and the username that we will log into that computer with. And this first line, called host, is actually the name that we want to use when we SSH to that computer. And this can be any name you want, but I specifically recommend calling this host Watson. I will now save this file, and what's awesome about this SSH configuration file is that it gets read not just by SSH within VS Code, but also when we do SSH from the terminal. So now, because I have created a host named Watson that connects to this computer with this username, I can run the command SSH Watson instead of that whole big login string from before, and that logs me into the same computer I was connecting to before. But there's still one more thing we can do to make SSHing even easier, which is to set up encryption keys that allow us to authenticate with a public-private key pair instead of using a password. If you search for SSH keygen, you'll find various documentation on how to do this, but my favorite version is the one provided by GitHub, so we'll go there. And it suggests that we run this command, SSH keygen, and then we're specifying what type of key we want to create and what email address we're associating this key with. So I will copy this command, and this same command works on Windows or Mac or Linux. I will paste it into the terminal. Of note, make sure that you are running this command on your computer rather than SSH'd to Watson. So if your terminal is still connected to the Watson computer instead of running locally, you should be sure to exit. And we should modify this example email, replacing it with our Davidson email. Then we can run this command, and it asks me where I want to save the key, and I'm fine with its default choice, so I'll leave this blank. And then it asks me what passphrase I want to use for my key, and you are welcome to add one, but in my case, since I trust the security of the computer in my office, and because I want to make SSHing very easy, I will leave this passphrase empty so that I don't have to type a password at all when I SSH. And when you get some weird ASCII art image, your key pair has been created. And within the output of this program, it tells us where it has saved the public key. So what this has done is created a pair of a public key and a private key. And what we need to do now is add the public key to our Watson account so that when we log in, the public key stored on Watson will be compared with the private key stored on our computer, and if they appropriately match, it will let us log in without a password. So to get that public key, we can use the cat command to dump out the contents of this .pub file. So I will copy that and paste it onto my cat command. And here is the public key that I am going to save onto Watson. So I want to copy this public key, and then I'm going to log back into the Watson computer by SSH. And I'll type my password one last time. And now in your home directory, there is a hidden subfolder that you can see with list and the -a flag. And this .ssh folder is where SSH configurations are stored. So we will cd into the subfolder .ssh. And here, if there is already a file called authorized keys, we're going to add to it, or if there isn't such a file, we will create one. Either way, we want to run the command vim space authorized _keys. And if there are already keys in this file, you can add yours as a new line at the bottom. Or if this is a brand new file, you can just add one line that is your public key. Either way, we want to hit I to enter insert mode, and then we can paste the public key that we copied before. Now we need to leave insert mode with escape, and then we'll use the command :WQ to save and quit. And now we have saved our public key that we created to the authorized keys file on Watson. And so now if we log out of SSH and log back in with SSH Watson, it no longer asks us for our password. And this goes just as well for SCP. I can, with this command and no password, copy the local file test.txt to my home directory on the Watson computer. Back in VS Code, I can hit this refresh button so that it will actually name the SSH target Watson, like we specified in the config file. And then we can use VS Code to directly edit files that are on the remote Watson computer. Let's push this Connect to Host in New Window button, and that will create us a new instance of VS Code where it will connect to our Watson computer using SSH. And if we open our home folder on the Watson computer and say that we trust it, it will show us all of the contents of that folder, including the test.txt file. And now, if I add another line to this file, and then save, that save operation uses SSH to save the file onto the remote location. So over on our terminal, if we SSH to Watson and cat out our test file, we saved this update from VS Code directly onto our Watson computer. But our previous instance of VS Code that's running on our local computer still has the version of the file that's saved locally. So when we're running VS Code, we can have it either edit remotely over SSH or edit locally, and we can tell which is which by the green text at the bottom here, or by the folders that we are connected to in the File Explorer. One final thing to note is that we can run an instance of a terminal within VS Code. So if we go to the Terminal menu and select New Terminal, in the instance of VS Code that's running remotely, this terminal is a Linux terminal running on the Watson computer. But if I do the same thing and create a new terminal in the version of VS Code that's running locally, this is using whichever terminal application my local computer has. In this case, it's also a Linux terminal, but yours might be PowerShell or a Mac terminal. And so these terminals operate exactly like the terminal application that we open separately, but sometimes it's more convenient to do that work from directly within VS Code. I hope you were able to follow along with all of these steps, but if you got stuck at any point along the way, please post your questions on Slack. I and the tutors will also be available to help with these problems during the first week of class. But if you've gotten your SSH configuration set up, then you are ready to go for connecting to Watson 132 remotely, and for starting on our activities in the first week of class.